Folks, with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this essay as you're going along in your car or your truck or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of Indians and the amount of Indians. This is from the subcontinent, the amount of Indians that are all across the West now, and they're forming quite large voting blocks, and they're voting almost as one, and they're demanding very special privileges and benefits and protections and handouts for their own diaspora. They're uniquely for their own diaspora. Now, I've always taken the view that Indians make very bad migrants. They don't want to integrate. They don't want to assimilate. They believe that they believe in maintaining genetic purity. That's one of their highest priorities. So they won't intermarry or anything like that. So they also want to maintain cultural purity. So they'll send back to the village of their ancestors in India for husbands and brides for any children that are born in the West. So you can have Indians that are 5 or 6, 7 generations Western born that still behave, at least culturally and spiritually and so on, behave like they've just left India the day before. Now, sure, they'll integrate as much as they have to extract money from whitey, so they'll economically integrate to a point. But even there, the economic integration is minimal. If you look at the chains of takeout food shops that are owned by offshore Indian investment companies, chains of medical centres, radiology, doing x-rays, radiology centres that are owned by offshore Indian interest, pharmacies, and they will only employ Indians at these places. They may have one token white person, like the blonde chick on the reception or something, but these jobs they will only employ Indians. They use them as labour hire scam fronts to bring more Indians out from India. And pretty much every Indian, certainly that I've spoken to, that's in Australia as an example, or even the UK for that matter, they will tell you that from early childhood, all they dreamed about was coming to the West, getting the fuck out of India and coming to the West. When you ask them about why do you come to the West if you're so culturally and spiritually and morally superior to the West? Why do you want to come to the West if there's just so much inferiority and racism and here? And then they'll quickly pivot and say, well, their own country is dirty, it's overcrowded, it's corrupt, the government is useless, the public services are decrepit, and It's an absolute bullshit basket case. But they'll come to the West and still insist. So they want to get out of that, come to the West, but insist that the West is morally, culturally, and spiritually superior, and there's no way they would procreate or intermingle with any other race. They want to maintain genetic purity. Now, because of this desire to maintain genetic and cultural purity, they will never integrate and never assimilate, nor do they want to, by the way, nor do they see that they should have to. So the more and more Indians that arrive in the West, and remember there's a fucking billion Indians that want to get the fuck out of India and come to the West. The Indian government wants to get rid of what it sees as a surplus population, and they demand in trade deals that it's much easier for Indians to get the fuck out of India and migrate to the West. That's like almost a mandatory requirement in trade deals. So the Indian government and the Indian people, all want to get the fuck out of India. And of course, insisting that Indians are now, there's even the Indian nationalist media insist that Indians are now at the intellectual apex of world affairs. Fuck. Obviously, I've never met these people. They must all duck and hide when I come around the corner. Anyway, because of this, Indians make, in my view, this is my opinion, Indians make terrible immigrants because they won't integrate and don't see why they should. Now, as more and more Indians arrive in the West, they are in a position, and increasingly become in a better position, a bigger position, to demand special benefits, special handouts, special protections. So if you look at, say, the elections in the United Kingdom that are coming up in just a few weeks, and then the presidential election and other elections happening in the United States, in November this year, then there's a lot of ramping up by the Indians, leveraging their nationalist sentiments and Hindu sentiments and so on, for wanting special treatment. For example, they want a special law. They're agitating for a special law about Hindu phobia. Maybe they want to sort of get on the bandwagon, well, Islamophobia. So they want a Hindu phobia law. They also insist that because districts all across the West, Sydney's no different. There are entire suburbs here where there are nothing but Indians. You go to the local grocery store in certain suburbs and you're the only white person there. I mean, fuck. So they congregate in certain areas, hang out together, do business with each other. If they spend money in white-owned businesses, it's with much reluctance. So they try and keep all the money within firstly their family, and then their community, and then the wider diaspora. And they make a lot of money. The money they make, they only want to spend in their own diaspora and not outside of it. Indian businesses will only employ Indians and so on. So they're terrible migrants. Now, some people say, well, because they're not lawbreakers or mass murderers, and they're law-abiding generally, and they're relatively quiet in terms of street level vocalism and that sort of thing, that they are desirable migrants, but they're not. They'll never integrate, and they will always demand special privileges and handouts. That they only want their own people to represent them in the white people's parliament. Must be Indian only, and there must be a certain amount of Indian only members of parliament, and there have to be special tax breaks for building Hindu temples. Oh, fuck. And the list goes on and on and on for their demands. Now, for every demand that's conceded, of course, that makes integration less and less possible. For example, if the numbers, if they were tied, if immigration rules would only take the best qualified, and they had to do a sit for another exam when they come to the West to make sure that it's up to Western standards, something the Indian government is desperately trying to dismantle. That the Indian immigrants should be under no requirement to prove they actually did pass the doctor's exam in India and this sort of thing. So it just goes to show us what a fucking scam the immigration system is for Indians, at least, and others too, of course. But if it was, they had to satisfy, they had first world qualifications and sit for exams, that would knock out a vast number of Indians. Do they have the qualifications? That would just knock. And saying, well, you can't have an arranged marriage. You must marry, for your kids, you must marry a local born person. You can't marry someone you can't go back to so this idea of cultural and genetic purity, gone. No. Or if you do want to marry you shouldn't stop someone from marrying. So if they do want to marry, then you have to stay in India for 15 years before you can come back to the West. This sort of thing. Then it would deter many Indians from wanting to come to the West, and secondly, the ones that did come would be far more likely to integrate or assimilate. And that's what you want. So these are things need to be done. But at the moment, they're a large voting bloc. I mean, 5 or 6, as I understand it, and I haven't got the numbers right in front of me, 5 or 6% of the people in England or Britain are Indian. Now, that's a pretty decent sized voting bloc, and there are a number of electoral districts where if you don't have the Indian vote on side, you ain't going to win. They're influential in as a byproduct of their tight concentration in certain suburbs and areas. Now, apart from anything, Indians are very, very corrupt and see corruption as a normal way of life. So, these are things to consider when the Indians are demanding their. Now, in Australia, there's quite a long and rich history of Indians setting up, Jussie Smollett type incidents. There's an Indian guy who was going to be deported, so he decided to claim that he was set on fire by evil white Nazi fascist racists, but he was setting fire to himself. Another Indian wanted to do an insurance scam and tried to burn his car, but instead he ended up burning himself. and all sorts of other incidents that they're set up. There's one in America just recently, where, as I understand, at least a local, an Indian guy, I think he was born in India, but he came to America at a young age. An Indian guy wants to, is claiming that there were social media hate posts against him. Turns out it was him hate posting himself and then claiming that white supremacists did it. Oh, fuck. But that's very Indian, that sort of behaviour. They've got a terrible chip on their shoulder, and this guy wants to maintain his, fervently maintain his Hindu religion. When he's pictured with his family, they're all dressed in Indian national costume and this sort of thing, but he wants to pass himself off as an American and get the vote. He's not getting any traction, so he wants to create this thing that he's a victim of white supremacy. No, you're not. If you're a victim of anything, it's because you're refusing to integrate and assimilate into society. Similarly, if you look at this guy, this Indian dude in America, his platform, and indeed other Indian politicians or aspiring politicians, their number one priority is to get more Indians out of India and into the West. That's their priority. It's not to represent the local, parliament, not to go into parliament to address things like the quality of education or the potholes in the road or the crumbling infrastructure. No. It's to get even more Indians to come into. It's to change the immigration law so any Indian at any time, anywhere, can just walk in and that's it. No questions will be asked. That's their priority. So they're clearly not representing the country or its people. They're only representing the Indian diaspora, and as they will never integrate or have a tiny integration rate. Yeah, you look at countries where Indians have been in decent numbers since like the 1850s. So we're talking 170 odd years ago. Still, the integration rate is less than 2%. Still, after that time, so they're just not going to integrate. And the more and more Indians there are, the more and more they will demand special privileges at the expense of everyone else. And in the West, we really need to wake up to this, because it's a slow-moving disaster, and we should be cognizant of it and be taking corrective action. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.